Veritas Aquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 35, Loss. Told you we'd make it here on time. Don't you feel silly, Sasuke? Naruto asked his teammate as they took their standard seats for Ublik's class. Good witch is giving us that evil eye, Sasuke muttered, his head slightly ducked as the instructor sent them dark looks for being a minute or so late. I think it's mostly for me, so don't worry, Naruto grinned at his friend. Your fetish fuel won't punish you much. Sasuke replied with a quick and hard jab of his elbow into the snickering blonde's side. He then opened his scroll and began to copy down the notes that Ublik left on the board. Naruto, meanwhile, rested his head on his crossed arms, his brows forward in thought over the strange chill that struck him on their way to class. Hope it wasn't a ghost, Naruto thought with a small shudder. His uneasy made Sasuke give him an odd look, but otherwise went unnoticed. Giving his brother from another mother a reassuring grin, Naruto pushed those thoughts to the back of his mind. Now, I'm sure all of you are wondering just why Professor Goodwitch has decided to accompany us today, Ublik said. He sipped whatever liquid gave him his energy from his cup, either unaware of or pointedly ignoring his assistant teacher's look of mild annoyance at his exaggerated method of drinking, before he continued. Well, with all of our defenses back up courtesy of our guests from Atlas, Ublik. Goodwitch gave him a pointed look. Her tone caused Naruto and Sasuke to share a look with each other. Obviously, Ublik didn't care for the intrusion of another kingdom's forces protecting Vale. They looked down to see Kurama sitting a bit taller in his seat. He undoubtedly picked up on it as well. Yes. Ublik waved Goodwitch off and adjusted his glasses. As I was saying, since our defenses are back to full strength, and you've all had quite the break between classes, I invited Professor Goodwitch to help. How should I put this? I know, to help ensure that old habits, sleeping in classes, skipping frivolously, or even dare I say it, cautious intrusions would be kept in check. And Professor Austin believed it would be a lot of work for just one professor to keep you rowdy ruffians from trying to eat the allotted time with the questions that detract from class. So they're basically trying to keep all of us in the dark about the research for the search for Roman Torchwick. Naruto, Sasuke, and Kurama thought dryly. Not 2 months have passed since his escape from custody, and still no leads, according to Kurama's inside source with the Ville Police Department, have turned up. Though we've been preoccupied with shenanigans outside of our control, Naruto thought with a small grin. Drinking on the Toad's money for once and indulging Yang's dad for the past few days has made it a bit difficult for me to get the skivvy on those details. So that said, let's all keep our focus on the subject today, which was what, Miss Nikos? Ublik asked while he looked at the invincible girl. Expansion of Mistral, Professor. Doctor, now, how many of you know? Ublik cut himself off mid-sentence when the door at the top of the stairs was knocked on. A second later, and Professor Osman entered. Professor Osman, what can I do for you? Sorry to intrude, Ublik, but I need Mr. Uzumaki to please come with me. The unnaturally stony Osman said from the door. The class turned to look at Naruto almost expectantly. The blonde in question blinked while he looked around hoarsely. Oh, come on. I've got other things on my mind aside from pranks, Naruto said with a frown. The class continued to stare at him. It too, Sasuke? Naruto asked at the boy seated on his side. Sasuke shrugged. Safe assumption. But you know what they say about assuming. It makes an ass of you and me. Naruto shot back with a grin. Sasuke cracked a small smirk and rolled his eyes. Oi, dumbass, quit your dawdling and let's go. Naruto's smile fell at the familiar voice and he turned to see Roshi standing behind Osman. The severe stare sent his way made his blood boil, and he pushed back the smarmy retort he wanted so badly to whip out and slap the old fart with. Naruto could feel Goodwitch's glare piercing the back of his skull, as though daring him to say something. Needless to say, Naruto was more than willing to obey the headmaster's request, if only to escape Goodwitch's gaze of doom. He rose up from his seat and made out of the way of the room with puzzlement on his features. A moment of silence passed, broken only by soft whispers. Sasuke shared puzzled stares with John and Pyrrha. Kurama and Velvet spoke in hushed tones, and Blake and Weiss were debating over whether Naruto had done something again. Ublik clapped his hands together. Yes, it's all very thrilling to see our first year clown get pulled out of class by the headmaster, but our attention is on a past that is more than 3 minutes ago, so if you'll turn your attention to the entry in your... I said cut it out! The muffled shout made necks snap as the students whipped around to look at the door behind them. Through the window pane, a glowing light could be seen. Other students turned to the door to the back of the classroom as the shouting continued for a good 5 minutes until it became faint and hard to make out. Then a loud bang rocked the school, and silence ensued until Goodwitch smacked her crop against Oobleck's desk, making many in the room, especially the Faunus with high-heighted senses, jump, pleased that she quelled any hushed conversations before they could even begin, and had brought attention back to a thankful Oobleck. Professor Goodwitch pressed and stepped out to see if anyone had been hurt. The last time any Uzumaki had an emotional episode on campus, Glinda shivered and rubbed a small concealed white scar on her arm. Thankfully, he lacks his mother's chains. Unfocused blue eyes stared straight ahead, and a normally sunny smile had slipped off of an ambling teen's face. The visiting student stepped out of his way as he shuffled across campus. His hands dug deep into his pockets, and his head hung. His mind kept replaying the scene that occurred not 15 minutes ago. Mr. Uzumaki, I'm sorry to be the one that has to tell you this. Ospen softly spoke as he stood opposite of Naruto. His eyes were weighted and wary as they looked over the team before him. Tell me what? Naruto asked. Roshi stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Listen, kid, I know we didn't get off on the right foot. That's an understatement, Naruto snorted. Sun's grandfather kicked his ass in less than a second and somehow always knew how to really piss him off. Must be an old guy thing. The Toad's good at it too. But was a good friend of your godfather, Roshi finished softly, ignoring Naruto's interjection. The way he corrected himself made Naruto look at him in confusion. Roshi, perhaps. Aspen was silenced by a look the man gave him. The best way to do it is to just rip the bandage off in one go, Roshi said firmly. He looked back at Naruto and his hard gaze softened. Naruto, Jiraiya is gone. No duh, he went to Bakkyo to get his next book published, and probably probably to goof off and peep around. Jiraiya snorted and looked at the headmaster. Prof, what's going on? This isn't easy, Mr. Uzumaki. Please bear with us, Aspen said softly, and an apologetic look on his face. Mr. Uzumaki, your godfather, whatever he told you he was doing in Bakkyo wasn't the case. Maybe the peeping part, Roshi said with a hint of a smile cracking through his stern features. Lord Jiraiya was looking for the Fourth War base of operations, Beacon's headmaster informed the team. Not looking for, found, Roshi corrected himself. He held up the item in his hand and placed it in Naruto's hand. The blonde turned it over and his breath hitched. An old horned silver headband was now in his grasp. What is, Professor, what? Naruto looked back at Aspen, whose eyes had closed. He looked at Roshi, whose face was grim. I'm sorry, Roshi said sincerely. He pointed at the headband, but the mountain needs a new sage. Your waiting time is over. Naruto looked down at the headband and shoved it back into Roshi's hands. That's not funny. This is not fucking funny. I'm afraid he's not joking, Mr. Uzumaki. Aspen began, reaching out to put a hand on the blonde's shoulder. Naruto knocked Aspen's hand off his shoulder as he backed away from him. I said cut it out, Mr. Uzumaki. I know this is hard. No, he was just going to talk to his publisher. He'll be back in a few weeks to perv and peep but you to come to terms with the reality of the situation. Stop, Naruto pleaded and covered his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. Shut up, he was just going to. Apparently fed up with Naruto's denial, Roshi grabbed hold of Naruto's collar, stopping his attempt to block out reality. The old wanderer shoved the taller teen against the wall and glared at him. God damn it, I'm sick and tired of seeing you brats today cry over the smallest shit. Your godfather, my friend, is dead, boy, he snarled, smoke pillaring out of his mouth as his aura flared. He's dead and gone, accepted, and the responsibilities that come with it. Pushed at his emotional limit for the day, something within Naruto snapped. His body began to lightly glow, and he grabbed the older man's arms. His whisker scars appeared thicker, and his eyes shone brightly as he glared right back at Roshi. Let go. I'll let go when you grow up. Roshi barked at as his body began to turn red. Mr. Wukon, Mr. Uzumaki, you both need to calm down, Aspen said as the boy's aura flared in his growing distress. He gripped his cane tightly and rested his thumb over a concealed button. No calming down. Far as I'm concerned, the mountain's too good for this selfish brat, Roshi snapped. He curled his lips into a snarl. Why, Jiraiya thought you'd be a good sage. I'll never know. Shut up. Naruto growled. The master always thought with his heart more than his head, but at least he knew when to man up and take charge. Let me go. Fucker must have been a terrible teacher if you never got that lesson. You sniveling, self-centered waste of. Naruto let out what could only be called the cross of an anguishing yell and an infuriated scream. Ozpin was barreled out of the way, knocked halfway down the hall, while Roshi found himself slammed through not just one, but three of the building's classrooms. To the faculty's relief, they didn't late they'd find later that no one was using the classrooms and they were scheduled for renovations anyway. When the dust settled, Naruto had Roshi embedded in the grounds outside the building. The older man was glaring up at him. Naruto's nostrils flared and his right fist shot out like a rocket, hitting the old faunus right in the snooze. Roshi's head flopped back and his semblance cut out instantly. Naruto panted heavily and began to shamble off, not caring of the wide eyes staring at him. He was going to get his book published, Naruto mumbled as he rested against the nearest tree. His hand covered his face and his eyes squeezed shut. A faint but echoing roar made his eyes crack open, and Naruto quickly pulled himself together. The last thing he needed or wanted was to be bothered by anyone right now. What better way to relieve some stress than to kill some soulless creatures? Have you found anything yet? Ospen asked. He sent a mild look of annoyance to his longtime friend as he checked his right arm, which he landed on quite roughly in the Uzumaki's fit. He was back in his office, and Roshi was escorted to the medical building by a very irate Tsunade Senju. Honestly, Osman believed he got off lightly. You mean aside from grim remains strewn around in a way that would make even the most iron-stomached butchers of Remnant green in the face? Then no, nothing much, Osama replied through the scroll. The man was more than displeased with how Osman chose to handle the situation. To say any member of Team Cage was annoyed would be an understatement. It was agreed that any news of this sort, no matter how inane it may seem, would be delivered by one of them. Members of the Uzumaki are, like their name suggested, they're whirlpools of emotions just waiting to be unleashed, merciless and cruel, and cannot be ridden out or controlled, and God help whoever or whatever pisses them off to that point. Hiruzen Sarutobi had commented when he was assisting with the cleanup that came after Naruto's mother had learned her family, being a wandering clan of nomads, were killed in a grim attack. Arguably, the event that occurred today was considered tame by Uzumaki standards. It even could have been prevented if Osman had handled it better. The headmaster sighed and rubbed his face with one hand. Please, keep me informed. You mean just like you informed us that one of our own died? Oh yeah, I'll be sure to do that. Asuma snorted before the call ended. Guwitch frowned at the scroll. That was uncalled for, she murmured. Was it though? Osman asked. He lifted his hand out of his face and grabbed his cane to rise to his feet. We need to contact James and tell him to stay out of it. His methods would only make it worse. I will tell General Ironwood to keep his patrols out of the Emerald Forest. Goodwitch interjected firmly as she pushed Osman back down into his seat. You will rest and wait for Team Cage to report in. Osman didn't bother to argue and let Glinda leave as he sat down without another word. He was too tired. Jiraiya was a friend, a confidant, and a damn fine huntsman. His experience in skirmishes against men, Faunus and Grim alike, made him an expert in frontline combat. His efforts in assisting Faunus during the revolution, though little as it was in the grand scheme of things, marked him as a big name. Then there were his novels. A part of Osman a part of Osman could lie and say he would quickly get over the death of his favorite novel, but Osman did his best not to lie, stretched the truth here and there, but never again would he lie. Jiraiya's work held many underlying themes beneath smut and more smut. Granted, that was a good part of why so many read the books, and he'd been submissively planting hidden messages that promoted peace and equality throughout his career. Jiraiya would claim he wasn't a politician. He would even go so far as to say he'd be terrible on any of the councils, but Osman knew that had Jiraiya even gotten a seat, had he ever really wanted to change things, he could. Jiraiya could even single-handedly destroy the kingdom's current government and build up his own if he so wished. A goof and pervert, beg pardon, super pervert you might have been, but no one was as politically savvy and underhanded when it came to that game as you, Jiraiya, Osman thought with a sad smile. Thinking of me, oh Osman, I'm flattered. Osman's eyes snapped open and glanced into the shadows where his guest leaned against the wall. I take it you've heard then? He asked. Heard? Whatever could you be talking about? The guest rubbed his chin before he snapped his fingers. Oh, could it be you're speaking of the death of the Toad Sage? I know damn well what You know damn well what I mean, Fire Shadow. Ospen spat in annoyance. I am too tired to deal with your games anymore. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. Fire Shadow drawled. He stepped forward into the light, revealing himself to be a man with a thick bandana wrapped around the left side of his face. The right side, heavily scarred and wrapped was and warped, was left uncovered, while the blood red pupils with black eyes stared intently at the headmaster. Spiky black hair sprouted from his head, untamed and wild. He was dressed much like Team Cage in navy and olive uniform, and strapped to his back was a sickle that looked all old and rusted. Around his left arm was a black band with a crude spiral leaf point painted into it. We gave you a chance to show that you could handle the problem on your own, and what did you do? You let that old fool talk you into letting him come with you. The Fire Shadow said with a disapproving frown on his face. He stepped forward and pulled a red scroll from his pocket, one that bore the insignia etched into the band on his arm. He wanted to speak with you directly. Doesn't this risk our alliance? Our alliance was compromised as soon as you let that thief into the tower. The half-masked man snapped. He pushed the scroll forward. I'm in no mood for games, Ospen. Talk to him, now. Ospen grimaced and took the scroll, opening it and pressed the solitary spiral button that appeared on the screen. A moment passed before a holographic image sprouted up. The hand of a white-haired man with half of his lower face appeared on screen. His left eye had a large scar from the top of his eyebrow to the middle of his cheek. Both of his eyes were dark, and though the left seemed darker than the right, and both were narrowed in anger. Do you know what you've done? It was a mistake, Ospen began, only to be cut off. No, 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 no. A mistake, Ospen, is knocking a glass of water off of the counter. A mistake is letting James Ironwood defend another kingdom that he is not from. A mistake is but dialing your one-night stand from 3 weeks ago. The holographic head's eyes narrowed further. What you did, Ospen, was fuck up royally. Congratulations, you just single-handedly broke all of Jiraiya's hard work. Now wait just a minute, Ospen frowned. I have not broken any of Jiraiya's work. We are still allied with the Wanderers, are we not? I thought. What you think is irrelevant, Ospen. The fact is, we are blind without our spy masters. The masked man spat out. Ospen winced and looked away from the glare leveled on him. The Queen still has pawns, Ospen, and despite what control or eyes you think you have on them, they're still in play on your side of the board. She took our advancing rook and now has us in check. Your next move determines whether or not it's checkmate or not just our brotherhood, but all of Remnant as a whole. Think that over while my people try to fix your mistakes. Fire Shadow, come home. Nightingale has another mission for you. You got it, boss. Fire Shadow nodded. The holographic head flicked out of sight, and the scroll shut down. A massive portal appeared behind Fire Shadow, and he grabbed the scroll from the desk. Fire Shadow flashed Ospen a small smile. Word of advice, Ospen. Let the Brotherhood's brains over in Khan handle the strategies from now on. You run your little school and do what you can to keep the heartless metal man in line. He may be a general, but he's not the headmaster, dear headmaster. Just go, Ospen muttered, his head still hung. Oh, guess the lightning fang's bite left a mark? Good, that's good. Fire Shadow chuckled and tossed the scroll up and down in his hand as he walked into the portal behind him. He shared some amused words of farewell that made Ospen clench his hands around his staff. Good luck, Ozzy. You're going to need it. As soon as classes for the day were cancelled due to some random and rather bizarre seismic activity, Team Ruby and Jupiter were pulled aside by Kurama and Sasuke. They mentioned that Ospen had snatched Naruto up before the first tremor shot shook the school's grounds. Since then, there had been 3 more, and both of the Khan natives were pretty sure it wasn't Remnant's tectonic plates to blame. At lunch, Yang ran into Kurenai and Asuma and asked them if they'd seen her missing blonde. Asuma brushed her off and stormed away. As he passed, Yang heard him grumble something about not having enough cigarettes for the stress the boy put him through and wishing he wasn't stuck with Kakashi's baggage. Kurenai explained that Naruto reacted poorly to some news that Professor Ospen gave him. When asked what the news was, Kurenai said she wasn't at liberty to say, only that it was a personal issue. Naruto, Yang called as she walked into the lecture room where she and Blake had their small spat earlier in the year. She and Naruto had been going to the classroom whenever they wanted to play hooky, so it sort of became their spot. It was honestly the last place she thought to look. Hell, she even checked the library before she came here. Finally, lilac eyes landed on the blond teen. He was seated at the front of the room with his back against the teacher's desk. He had his left arm draped over one knee that was pulled over his chest, while his right rested at his side, gently clapped around the two small glints bound by a loose cord, and both sets of knuckles were red with dried blood. His head was hung, and his hair absorbed his eyes from view. Scattered around the ruffled blonde were a few freshly cooked instant meal cups. One was knocked over entirely, and another was barely even touched. Not good, Yang thought as she bit on her lip and pulled her scroll out. And she sent the group conversation a message telling that she'd found Naruto, and then pocketed the device. When she was close enough, Yang took a seat to his side and sat there quietly, waiting. He made no sign of being aware of her presence, not even a sound of greeting. Very, not good. Naruto, what happened? Why'd Professor Osman call you out of class today? Yang ventured. Jiraiya's dead. Oh god, Yang thought when Naruto's shoulders tensed. The fourth war. Yang put her hand in the one that rested on his knee, grasping it tightly and pulling it away to let her have a better look at his eyes. She looked at him in concern and worry written on her features. Naruto's grip tightened around hers. He was the only real family I had left, only connection I had to my parents. Naruto fiddled with the items in his right hand. A quick look revealed the items were his parents' rings. He gave me these, said that they were the only things requested removed from their bodies in their will. I don't even know what kind of weapons they used, how they fought. I can only imagine through stories. Old told me friends removed any photos of them from the net, and they created a lot of enemies. All I had were stories. His stories. Naruto tightened his grip around the rings. He was the only one that talked about them. Are you? What am I thinking? Of course you're not. Yang interrupted herself before she asked the very insensitive and stupid question. She leaned forward, trying to get a look past the short curtain of blonde hair that his eyes hid behind. Naruto, come on, talk to me. Let me help. Why didn't he ask? Why didn't he ask to go? I could have helped him. I could have. Right. Naruto's hand dropped from his face, and he looked up at the ceiling. Two identical rivers of tears poured from his normally bright, now severely dark blue eyes, over his whisker marks and down to his jaw. Naruto, she gently pulled him into a hug, his head on her shoulder, while his arms wrapped loosely around her sides. Stupid old toad, Naruto muttered, his eyes squeezed shut. Dumb, perverted asshole. Tears fell silently, and Yang pressed her head against his. Being someone that also bore her emotions to the world, she cried with him, for his loss, for his pain. Her scroll buzzed in her pocket, but Yang ignored it as Naruto began to break down into sobs and clung to her like a lifeline. She would tell everyone he was fine in a few minutes, but for now, Yang would shoulder his pain and help him take the first step through the loss of a family member. Practically everyone knows that it's heartbreaking to see someone you care for look so utterly depressed, but that isn't what Yang felt at the moment. She was sad for Naruto and wished he didn't have to go through that pain, but at the moment, Yang was worried. She was worried that it would be the breaking point for her boyfriend, the point where he lost himself. She wouldn't be surprised if it was. Naruto had lost so much already to the Fourth War. His parents were dead before he could even recognize them, let alone see their faces. He lost his pseudo-grandfather, who played a large part in his upbringing. A part of Naruto's soul was forever gone when their twisted project, a boy his age, died at his hands. Now his godfather, the only remaining link he had to his parents, the man that had taken 3 years of his own time to show Naruto the world, was gone, and in the grand scheme of things, it would appear to be a small loss, but Yang was sure that to Naruto, his world had been significantly rocked, and not in a good way. If Yang were in his shoes, if someone had killed her father, her uncle, her teammates, or her little sister, it would be enough to justify getting revenge by any means necessary. She would be out hunting down those responsible. That Naruto wasn't on a warpath right now could change in an instant. So it was now, in the moment, that Yang would push her fears back and just be there to help him grieve, to help him accept, and to help him move on. They stayed in the classroom, silently grieving the world's super pervert with a heart of gold for the rest of the day, until the rest of Team Nox came to gather up their emotional drained leader. Kurama hung back while Sasuke helped Naruto hobble up, and Haku cleaned up the wasted ramen. The faunus put a hand on Yang's shoulder, giving the red-eyed girl a grateful nod. He squeezed her shoulder once before he left the classroom, and after a few minutes, Yang vacated the room as well. Yang pulled out her scroll when it played Ruby's jingle and sighed. Ignoring Ruby when she was with Naruto was easy, but doing it alone always made her feel horrible. Answering the call, Yang put the scroll up to her ear. Yes, Ruby? Did you hear the news? Yeah, I did. Yang sighed. She stopped at a window and looked over at a nearby building where the janitor's staff was placing a tarp over a massive wall, and a few gardeners were debating how to best fill the sudden groove that ruined the perfectly cut grass. What are you going to do? Ruby asked. I don't know, Rubes. Just be there, I guess. Yang muttered while she rested against the wall. What? Are you going to drop out too? You can't do this to us, Yang. Team Ruby needs you. Wait a minute. Yang frowned and narrowed her eyes. Ruby, what are you talking about? Who dropped out? Team Nox. What? Yang almost dropped her scroll when she jumped back to her feet and sprinted to the dorms. What do you mean they dropped out? Well, at least that's what Nora told me. Yang's eyes twitched. Nora was almost as bad as a gossip as Kurma was, only her juicy news was always embellished to the extreme, so most people didn't believe her. Most people sadly did not include Ruby. She saw Kurma and Sasuke talking to Professor Osmond and some old guy with a weird purple hair across his nose. She said Ren said that he overheard them say they'd be packed and ready to go as soon as they found Naruto. As soon as Yang's eyes twitched. Ruby, get Weiss and Blake and meet me outside their room. I would, but hey, give it back. Yang, it's Blake. The soft-spoken voice of Yang's partner cut into the conversation while Ruby struggles to reclaim her scroll were heard in the background. They're already gone. Yang slowed to a stop, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stood alone in a hallway. Gone, but I just saw them. Yeah, and old guy that Ruby described grabbed their things about 15 minutes ago. Blake sounded uneasy, and Asuma and Guy helped him. Yang's head tilted down, and her free hand balled into a fist. Her eyes burned red with anger. They helped? Yeah, something big is happening. I've heard a few whispers from the Vacuo students. And Sons, well, it's almost. Spit it out, Blake. Yang frowned. Blake normally didn't mind being as blunt as a sledgehammer, and it was admittedly one of her most positive traits. Sometimes things had to just be said so that people would learn. Give me that. Wise voice interjected into the scroll. Yang, from what we've heard, it sounds like Vacuo's preparing for war. I think that Team Nox has been drafted. This time, Yang did drop her scroll. She slumped to her knees, and the voices of her team started to become muted. The red in her eyes had dwindled away as the thought of Vacuo preparing for war repeated in her mind. Yang remained on her knees on the ground, her eyes focused and distant. Nox had been drafted. Naruto's been drafted. More silent tears poured over her eyes, but they were not empathic tears. Yang wore her heart on her sleeves, and right now it felt like they had just been ripped off. End of chapter 35.